And it is wonderful to see you all here. It is a packed house for this event. Many of you have heard me say that this series is one of Philly's great cultural treasures. By bringing authors together with readers, we create a space for important conversations, for engaging conversations, for sometimes challenging conversations. In doing so, we aim to promote civic dialogue and to make the literary world accessible to the Philadelphia community. And what a season it has been. Since early January, we've welcomed to this stage historians, scientists, travel writers, food writers, poets, novelists, and more. We've had a sitting United States Senator and a former United States President. But there are still two exciting events coming up. Next week, we have Cara de Robertis and Omar Tyree. Tickets are still available for these events at freelibraryfoundation.org. I want to say just a few quick words also about our organization in general. The foundation works together with the Free Library to support programming and advance its mission of promoting literacy throughout the Philadelphia region. As a nonprofit, of course, we are reliant upon your support to help us achieve these goals, so please do consider donating, which you can also do through our website. Again, that's freelibraryfoundation.org. Before we get to tonight's program, there are a few people and organizations I'd like to thank. We are grateful first and foremost to this season's sponsor, Comcast, whose support allows us to keep these events as accessible and as affordable as possible. I'd also like to thank Uncle Bobby's, our partner bookseller, and the Philadelphia Citizen, our new media partner. Tonight, we welcome the Emmy Award-winning TV journalist Jake Tapper. Who's excited to see Jake Tapper? A hometown hero who is lead DC anchor and chief Washington correspondent for CNN. He's also a prolific author. He wrote the best-selling nonfiction book, The Outpost, An Untold Story of American Valor, which was turned into a critically acclaimed film in 2020, and two New York Times best-selling novels, The Hellfire Club and The Devil May Dance. He will be discussing his new book alongside his co-author Alex Thompson, who is a national political correspondent for Axios and a CNN contributor. Before that, Alex created Politico's West Wing Playbook newsletter and worked at the New York Times and Vice News. They will be joined in conversation by Tamala Edwards, who joined 6ABC in January of 2005. She's the weekday co-anchor of Action News Mornings from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. and is a regular co-host of Inside Story, conducting probing interviews with newsmakers like Governor Tom Corbett, Senator Bob Casey, Mayor Michael Nutter, and others, as well as moderating many election debates. Prior to joining 6ABC, Tamala Edwards was the anchor of ABC's World News Now and World News This Morning. Well, folks, here we go. Please join me in welcoming Jake Tapper, Alex Thompson, and Tamala Edwards.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. Can everybody hear me? Yes. It is wonderful to have you here tonight. Of course, it's a little bit of old home week with Jake being here. Alex, welcome. Jake and I go back to reporters in our 20s. He was doing the internet. We were like the internet, and he was like, just you wait. But we knew then that Jake was an incredible reporter and would go amazing places. In fact, when it was announced on ABC that I was coming to PVI, Jake was there, and he thought he was going to get me. He was going to ask me some questions. You know, how do you say skookle? Wit or wit out? What he didn't know, and I'm only confessing this tonight, the producer gave me all the answers.
I know.
So he was furious, but it all worked out. But it is wonderful to be back here with you tonight and to get to meet you, Alex. And I think everybody has a copy of the book, which is quite something. Jake, you've done no press. Nobody's heard anything about this. And because of that, because many of you have probably listened to a podcast, read an excerpt in The New Yorker and in other places, I told Jake and Alex I wanted to do something a little bit different, really kind of get into how they feel about some of the material, go behind it the way they would when they bump into you, his actual friends and neighbors and people in the street. And he has agreed to give us all the time in the world. Let's see how this goes.
True.
Alex may leave you, and we'll keep going.
Yeah, I didn't agree.
So, as you look at the book, I mean, the cover art is quite something. And the title says quite a bit: Original Sin, President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and His Disastrous Choice to Run Again. And I wanted to ask you about the choice of the word cover-up, because indeed, I think you strongly make the case that Jill Biden, Hunter Biden, Mike Donilon, Steve Ricchetti, Anita Dunn, there were some people who saw him all the time and knew what was going on and hid it. I think a lot of people have questions about how could this be a cover-up of this scale? Don't any number of people see him? And do you really just say to yourself, well, I don't see him a lot, he's having a bad day, he's not the same age as Obama and Clinton? When you say cover-up, do you mean that handful of people, or do you really mean something larger, or was it just most people couldn't put the dots together until the debate?
It's a great question. Hold that thought, because I just want to say a couple things before we begin. I want to thank Monique Moore-Pryor, who's president of the Philadelphia Free Library, Jenny Begani and Daniel Block, who were with the Department of Public Programs. I also want to thank Sadeh and Judge Hughes, who we got to meet, who are board members, and everybody with the Pepper Society. Thank you so much for our support. This is my favorite stop on this entire book tour. I used to come here as a teenager and just go through the stacks, and it's so fun to be here. Obviously, I want to say hi to my dad and my stepmom, Shelley, who are here,
Aww.
and my sister, Debbie, and her husband, Andy. I know that there was somebody had like a health alert, and somebody said, is there a doctor in the house? And there were two from my family. And one of them, Andy, was on the case. So it's great to see you guys. Thank you so much for coming. All right. And also Tam. Tam, who I think I've known since 1999.
Pretty much.
And this is not smoke. She looks the exact same. It's
If only.
It's crazy and unfair. And I'm so glad that Philadelphia has embraced this Texan and made her one of our own. So thank you, Philadelphia, for doing that, for Channel 6's Tam Edwards. And I have already apologized to her for who I was in my 20s. So, all right. We discussed and debated what word to use. Conspiracy, cover-up, like what exactly are we alleging after we did this huge reporting project and talked to more than 200 people, almost all of them Biden-loving Democrats, and almost every single one of them after the election, which is only when people got candid and got honest about what we had all just seen. It is true that we all saw President Biden aging. He's been in public life for this community since 1972. Just because Delaware's in our meeting market. Okay. He's a California boy. I don't know what he knows.
Do you know how many times I've stayed in the Wilmington
I
courtyard?
know. So, we all saw it, but the question was, what is serious and what is just aging? I mean, I'm 56, I'm aging. There are things that I can't say or do like I could when I was 40. So what exactly are we alleging is a cover-up? And what our reporting suggested was, what we all saw the night of the debate, you on your TV and me with my own eyes, was somebody who was, for want of a better word, non-functioning. He could not articulate a sentence. It wasn't just he couldn't articulate a vision, he was having trouble just finding the right words. And that happens to every person, no matter what age, but I think we were all shocked the degree to which it happened that night and for the extent to which it happened. So how much was that Joe Biden, for want of a better term, the non-functioning Joe Biden, how much of that was how much did that version of him rear his head before that night? And what we found was a lot more than people would be comfortable with if they'd known the truth. And it dated back quite some time, but as happens with aging, with good days and bad days, good moments and bad moments, those bad moments, those non-functioning moments, happened more and more significantly in 2023, 2024, and there were efforts to hide it, not just from the public or from the press by limiting his interactions with the members of the media or limiting his time on the campaign trail or whatever, but they were hiding him from members of his own cabinet. They were hiding him from members of the White House staff. They were hiding him from Democratic members of Congress, to the point that it became clear to us that while we are not alleging criminality, it is not a crime to lie to the American people, as we all know. But it was clearly an effort to hide that in a way that when we were interviewing cabinet secretaries and interviewing members of Congress and interviewing members of the members of the White House staff who were telling us there was an effort to hide him from people, we said that, well, this is a cover-up. A cover-up is just the definition, the colloquial definition is when you're hiding something bad from people, and this is what that was.
I think part of what made me wonder about this is I've spent some time in Washington, and you know how it works. To be a reporter there is not just the act of calling people on the phone, it's choosing to be embedded in the town. Your neighbors, people at your kid's soccer game, at the grocery store, at your religious institution, their sources, their friends, you go to a party. The CNN green room is like a nightclub of gossip. But those are the places where people say, I'm not seeing him a lot, it's kind of weird. I saw him, he's a bag of bones, he didn't remember things. I don't know, man, this looks really bad. And so are you telling me people weren't doing that? It's a Saturday night, you have a glass of wine, you're sitting in the CNN green room, you're like, how long is this track meet gonna go on? And people are not saying to you, something's wrong.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, green room gossip is not reportable. So it was difficult. Here, one second, I'm just moving the mic here. It was difficult to report those things, and as Jake noted, we all saw him aging. But I do think you sort of just captured something that is particular about DC, which has happened in a lot of consequential stories, is sort of the clubbiness and the groupthink. And that at times, like reporters, Democrats, lawmakers, it's not fun to sort of stick your neck out. Jake had this when he was covering the Obama White House, when the town is what it's often referred to, sort of, it was enthralled in some ways, and Jake was just like a tough reporter. And, I think with the specter of Donald Trump on the horizon, there was this willfulness to try not to see what was in front of our eyes.
I wanted you to talk a little bit, Alex. You are known for some of the stories that you wrote, and you really gave it to the press a little bit when you accepted a big award at the White House Correspondents' Dinner recently, about what would happen when you would do that. When you would write a story, how would they respond? And it seems as though social media is an overlay. They're not just going after you, they are weaponizing your Twitter feed, your Instagram, all the other stuff. But then you hold that up against a town full of people who want to be the next Woodward and Bernstein. And it's still hard to imagine that you don't go, well, this is what I signed up for. I mean,
I guess I was, I'm the beneficiary of never having dreamed of being Woodward and Bernstein, I sort of fell into reporting, and I think I fell into reporting because I'm a bit of a contrarian, and I don't mind. I remember someone that wanted to hire me once said, "There's something missing from your brain because you don't mind pissing people off," and I think they meant it as a compliment, but it was, I think I did not. It was, and the reason I made those comments at the White House Correspondents' Dinner was not to I called out my own reporting because at that point, Jake and I had reported this book out, even though I had been aggressive on this particular topic. I realized that I'd only skimmed the surface. We only knew a fraction of what was actually going on behind the scenes. And it just felt odd to win an award for something I felt the press fell short on, and I thought, I think the press, especially given the amount of attacks coming from not just the current administration, but on social media from both sides, I think there's a reflexive defensiveness, which I think is understandable. But I think, my mom always taught me that like if you mess up, you acknowledge it, and like that helps build trust for next time. And I think reporters should do that more often.
But Jake, in the book you lay out, reporters had cause to be afraid. What would happen if you wrote something about aging? What were you in for?
Well, we have a number of reporters in the book who talk about their experiences writing, just doing journalism. Michael Shear of the New York Times, Peter Baker of the New York Times, these two women, Annie Linsky and Siobhan Hughes of the Wall Street Journal. And the White House would go after them, publicly accusing them of getting the story wrong, and they would find a lot of support, not organic, that they would solicit from Democratic operatives, from sympathetic liberal journalists, not just ones that are explicitly progressive, but also just other reporters who were eager to come to the defense of the Biden White House and personally attack the individuals or the reporting. There's also just, and it looks like a slightly older audience tonight, so I'll just say, like, it is nasty out there on social media, nasty, personally nasty, and reporters are human. Nobody likes to be attacked. Nobody likes to be personally attacked, and I think a lot of that happened. I know that Annie and Siobhan from the Wall Street Journal, who wrote their story in June 2024, I think it was traumatizing for them, the degree to which Democratic senators, Democratic members of the House were assailing them as bad reporters. Many of the same Democratic officials and office holders who not even a month later were behind the scenes, like telling Biden's campaign leaders he needs to drop out. This is awful. A lot of the same people. I mean, Alex makes the point, and the point was made in the book by Senator Mark Warner, which is he just spent 4 to 8 years watching Republicans tell him what they really thought about Donald Trump, and then publicly go out and say the opposite. And Warner felt like a hypocrite, given the fact that he was doing the same thing with President Biden. So, I mean, I just think the degree to which public attacks and public shaming can really have an effect on a journalist's psyche means that we are no different from anybody else being attacked. And that is, I think it can be very, very effective.
Let's get into the substance of the book a little bit, which is the disastrous decision to run. And you note that as far back as 2021, Biden was maybe saying, I think I'm going to do this. And yet, people go back to the comment about being a bridge. Was he lying about being a bridge? Did he
They would say he's not lying because he never explicitly promised. But you can, he was not being candid when he said that. I mean, he was saying it because he knew there were concerns about his age, and he was trying to sort of wink and nod. I'm just a transition figure. But I remember someone very close to Biden told us he is nothing if not for this. It has been his life project and in some ways a family project to get to this office. He started basically thinking about running for president as soon as he was constitutionally eligible. And so I think, and it's striking to see some of the oldest people, the people that he's known the longest, and some of the closest aides, they basically just said, every president gets 2 terms. Every president runs for election. It was, and in some ways I think hit the chip on his shoulder, which I think, has driven him in a lot of ways, drove that sort of, I'm just obviously going to do it. Obama and Bill Clinton, they had worse midterms than I did. They got to run for re-election. There was something of like, I deserve to do it.
If I could just interject,
Sure.
the reason that so many people were under the impression that he was only going to serve 1 term is not an accident. In December 2019, 4 senior aides to then Vice President Biden on the campaign leaked to Ryan Lizza, who was then a reporter with Politico, Biden's only going to serve one term. There's no way he's ever going to serve 2 terms. He'd be too old. Like, they did this before the primaries, knowing, according to polling, that this was the major concern about Joe Biden. That he was, I guess at the time, 77, 78, and people were worried about it. So they put it out in the ether, and Ryan thinks this was a strategic leak, that they did it on purpose. So that's out there in the ether. And then and then in March 2020, he says, I'm going to be a bridge. And he says it on stage at an event in Michigan with Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Gretchen Whitmer, right? All in their 50s. And so that's why we were supposed to have that impression. That was the goal, but he never explicitly said it.
A little cagey, that.
Yeah. Well, welcome to politics, yeah.
So the book, the way you guys set it up is, it is a log over time that you just start to see more and more evidence of what's going on. You lay out how there are little bits even in 2019. You're like, okay, 2020, they can't get a campaign video going because he's just having a tough time. And then by the time we get to about 2022, it's really starting to get disturbing, 2022 into 2023. Was there a turning point as you've sifted through all of the evidence that you say to yourself, that's it, that is the moment of no return, somebody should have stopped there? What year, what was it, what happened?
We actually have different takes on this. Give yours.
I think that it's one of our mics.
Is this mine?
I think it's mine.
Okay.
I think sort of the point of no return here is after Robert Hur, the special counsel, came out with this report, and people had been in the room, they knew what was going on, and he went out there and he said that, and this is a man that was appointed by Biden's own attorney general, and they went out there, instead of someone going in front of him, and by early 2024, it was very clear that Joe Biden was struggling and that many senior administration officials did not believe he was up to being president until January of 2029, which is what he was running to do. It was now, like, as someone close, high up in the White House told me, like, Robert Hur finally said the thing. And I feel it's sort of this point of no return. I think people talk themselves into it. But as soon as that report comes out, I feel that, someone, and this is sort of the shocking thing, it's like one of the most consequential decisions in American history is Joe Biden deciding to run for re-election. And what is sort of shocking about it is how little process there was. No one was willing to get in his face, in part because they didn't want to be seen as disloyal, and in part for their own self-interest. But I think after the Robert Hur report, it just becomes undeniable.
Your moment?
So I think that, there are any number of moments where somebody should have said, I know you think that you're the only one that can beat Trump, and I know you think that Trump is an existential threat to America, but you're not up for this, for the rigors of a political campaign, and you're not up for being president until January 2029. And the existential threat of Donald Trump is not something that we belittle. That is certainly what Democrats believed, and is why so many people went along with this, even with serious concerns about President Biden's ability to do it, up until the point that it was all exposed during the debate. I think the moment where somebody should have intervened, and again, he had surrounded himself with people who would never do this, so that's one of the problems. There was nobody in his world to say, don't do that. He just had, anybody like that had been removed. A lot of presidents do that. I think the last one who didn't was probably Obama, who would have people around him. But even, it's not fun to have people, like Axelrod would do that to Obama, and I don't think he served all 2 terms in the Obama White House. It's not a fun role, but it's essential. I have people like that in my life, and I need it, and I don't have control of any nuclear weapons. So, yeah,
thank goodness.
Yeah. Well, I have some targets, though. I will say that I think the moment, so we really, through the reporting, we traced 3 moments that really led to some psychic deterioration of his, and they're all 3 moments that are very poignant and reasonable, which is the death of his son, Beau, in 2015, which one top aide of his said it was like watching somebody pour water onto sand in terms of like his psychic disintegration, just like what was lost. And you know, I'm entirely sympathetic to that. I knew Beau, University of Penn grad, unbelievable guy, and that was a real loss, not just for his family, but honestly for the world. He would have been a great governor, senator, president, Beau Biden. But beyond that, it was his son, his pride and joy. So I can understand that. And then there were other moments which were tied to Hunter. Hunter Biden, the last surviving member of his first family because of the horrible car crash in 1972 that took his wife and daughter. And then Beau was gone, and Hunter's the only one left. And Hunter obviously struggling with addiction. And Joe Biden tells an aide that when Hunter Biden's memoir comes out in 2021, which was candid-ish, but had some moments were explained, and he said, I had no idea how bad it was. When Hunter Biden's plea deal for the gun prosecution falls through in the summer of 2023, according to top aides, Biden has another moment where he loses something. And this is not just about a fear that his son will go to prison, although that's obviously a very serious fear. It's because Hunter is very explicitly saying, the Republicans want me to relapse, they want me to die, they want me to kill myself. That's what this is about. They're trying to get you by making me relapse. And President Biden, again, I'm entirely sympathetic to this, is terrified that he's going to lose a 3rd child. And that leads to another psychic deterioration that gets even worse a year later, right before the debate, when Hunter is convicted in Wilmington of that gun charge. And it's less about the legal repercussions and more about, oh my God, am I going to lose a 3rd son? And I think that moment in 2023 when the plea deal falls apart, when people around him see, oh my God, what is happening to the president? I think that was an opportunity where it would have been reasonable to say, I don't think you can do this, I don't think your family can do this. We have an incredible bench of Democrats. You don't have to look much farther than a graduate of the Akiba Hebrew Academy, Josh Shapiro. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying, like, that's the Democratic bench. I knew Shaps. He was in my little brother's class. And he was the exact same guy. Well, he was a little less cocky back then.
Now he's got.
He's a little cocky. He's got a little swag now. But yeah, same guy. By the way, ran for president of the student body at Akiba. Did not win. Not that I did. But anyway, I think that would have been a good moment. Like, and I don't know that he would have listened, but there was an opportunity for Buttigieg, Whitmer, Shapiro, Warnock, Newsom, Pritzker. There was a whole bunch. Who? Coons would have run, you think?
Oh, no, not to run, but to tell him the truth.
Oh, I don't know if anybody was willing to tell him that. I don't know if anybody was in his circle that was willing to tell him that. I just don't. Coons would have been a great guy to tell him that. I don't know that he would have.
Let's talk about the reasons why, because we get to the midterms of 2022, everybody's being told they're going to get shellacked, it's going to be terrible. The red wave is kind of a pinkish trickle. And buoyed by that, Biden says that spring, I'm running again. And then you say to yourself, why? And you guys lay out a couple of different things that are going on. And I wonder, this is more a gut check question. Was it lust for power and greed? Jill likes being first lady. Donilon made $4 million during the campaign, and he has said, when you don't have the campaign plane and all the other stuff anymore, you miss it. Was it like Lord of the Rings, where you just can't throw the ring into the fires of mortar? The fear that no one else can take on Trump, a legitimate fear, worried about Hunter, or something else. This is the thing that came to me as a parent, looking at him, that they were trying to give him a reason to live. I've lost 2 kids. One's probably not doing well, and the other one's in rehab too. That it was, as crazy as it sounds with the presidency, a distraction that they thought would keep him going.
I think all, with varying degrees, I think all of those reasons were at play. And the midterms, to your point, I mean, they did find, I think Joe Biden would have run no matter what. And I think the family would have encouraged him to run no matter what. The better than expected midterms ended up being a helpful rationale for that. But I still think they would have said he's the only one that beat Donald Trump. Now, the last point you made is really interesting. I remember somebody who's known Joe Biden, worked for Joe Biden for a long time, they equated him to a shark, which is that he has to keep swimming or he'll die. And they, and our reporting shows that not only Joe Biden's death in 2015, but those years in between him being vice president and him running again on the soul of the nation, 2017, 2018, people saw him after those 2 years and felt he had aged a decade. That as he was sort of, post, that was the end, that, I think he was looking for purpose and a renewed purpose, and the family saw him being invigorated by the pursuit of, taking on Trump and beating back the forces of Trump. Great ringtone.
Somebody has
Very
a
good ringtone.
Benny Hill ringtone. that
And
is.
you knew what it was, Jay. I was like, oh, just good ringtone.
I watched Channel 29 growing up.
His went off
Is
during
that still a
podcast
channel?
recently.
Is that still a channel? It is, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's the Fox affiliate.
Yeah. And they pretty much have Benny Hill's kind of stuff on there these days.
Just one other thing about that point. Well, people who run for president are wired differently than most humans. I mean, they think that they should run the world, every one of them, and that is a daunting thing to think about when you think about somebody, even if you admire them. They think they should run the world. I mean, you really have to have quite an ego to think that. Joe Biden had thought that probably since he was elected senator in 1972. And there was also just the degree to which, and we get into this in the book, the degree to which Joe Biden, and this is one of the things that everybody loves about Joe Biden, is that fate has thrown so many horrible things at this guy, and he gets up off the floor every time. And it is admirable. It is an unbelievable quality. And whether it's his debilitating stutter as a kid, or the horrible car accident in 1972, or the 2 brain aneurysms, or on and on and on and on, he, like the idea of get up, we have a chapter in the book called Get Up, because that's what his dad would tell him, get up, is something about Joe Biden that we love. It's also the quality that made it impossible for him in his brain to think that maybe I shouldn't get up this time. One other point on this issue is, somebody asked me one time, like, I'm sure you guys have all wondered to yourself, like, what the hell happened to Rudy Giuliani? And this was America's mayor. He's on Man of the Year in 2001, or Person of the Year in 2001, and then what is this? And the answer is, and this explains so many things when it comes to people who have been in public life. It is difficult to go from being relevant to being irrelevant. And you guys live normal lives. You're not public figures, and you don't have to deal with that, right? But we all experience it one degree or another in smaller ways. But, and there'll be a day when I'm irrelevant, maybe tomorrow. But I'm sure it will be a very painful process and not fun. And I'm sure that was what Joe Biden went through from 2017 until he announced his campaign in 2019. I remember running into him on the train on Amtrak, and nobody was bothering him. I need a new mic. Nobody was nobody cared. And I'm sure that sucked.
You get down to the brass tacks, though, of running a campaign, and he's already having trouble in 2020. And they make decisions like he's not going to talk to normal media outlets. A friend said to me, I knew something was wrong when I didn't hear his voice. All my life, you hear the president's voice, anything happens, and he's on his way to the plane, and I didn't hear Joe Biden's voice. That's when I knew what was going on. But they make the determination, why do the New York Times or NBC News or CNN or something else? Because people aren't watching these things, they aren't reading them anymore. And you think to yourself, how did they think he was going to do this where, could he go on Joe Rogan for 3 hours if he can't do 30 minutes with the New York Times? Can you imagine Joe Biden on Hot Ones? But that's what you have to do.
Hold on, you have to explain what Hot Ones is to the crowd.
Hot Ones. And there was a conversation about Kamala Harris going on Hot Ones. It is a show where people go on and they eat increasingly spicy things. Like, I'm going to evaporate at this table spicy. But it has become the place to go. It's a huge, huge podcast. And the host is amiable and asks all kinds of questions. It's a friendly environment. It also shows that it's a testing of the mettle, that you still got it, that you can eat this increasingly hot food. And I think it would have been not good if he had done it. But they had to know we cannot compete in the terrain right now.
Well, I mean, this is one of the things when people say we didn't see the decline. I think this is one of the points when it's very unconvincing, because I'm sure for people in this community, like Joe Biden was one of the most loquacious, easiest quotes in all of Washington and all of the country. I mean, it was like reporters would try not to interview him because they knew it would take so long. And, you ask like 3 questions and 2 hours of your day is gone. So the fact that he was no longer doing this, now they would make claims, and listen, like the idea that legacy traditional media doesn't have as much sway anymore, that is true. But they use that as an excuse, because the real answer was he was no longer capable of doing what he used to. He had lost sort of the gift of gab. Jake interviewed him both in 2020 and in 2022, and a person in the White House told us that by 2023, Joe Biden was no longer capable of doing even that 15-minute interview that Jake conducted with him in 2022. So there were, by their very actions, they were aware of his limitations.
And just to say, I interviewed him in September 2020, and he seemed fine. Honestly, he seemed completely fine, completely lucid. I interviewed him 2 years later. It was like taking a time machine 20 years. But he didn't seem addled. He just seemed super old. And it was a very short interview, like 10 minutes. Both interviews I asked about health and age stuff, and he was fine answering the questions. But the idea that he couldn't do the 2022 interview in 2023, when somebody told me that, it was just like shocking, because it was not that challenging an interview. He did do some, another ringtone.
That's interesting, though.
We're getting a good sample of ringtones tonight. He did do some long form interviews, but very rare and not hard. He sat down with Seth Meyers in early 2024, and he was fine. He sat down with Howard Stern, and it was not videoed. I don't think there was any video.
It was videoed.
It was?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It largely dwelled on stuff from decades ago.
Yeah, it was. Well, that's exactly right. It was about who he was. It was about long-term memories, which are the last to go, and it was fine. It would not give you confidence like this guy could be president until 2029, but it was not Hot Ones. It was certainly not Joe Rogan, which would be a challenging interview.
You're sitting 20 feet away from your dad. And I think a lot of people look at the Biden family and say, if you love this man, Jill, if you love this man, Hunter and Ashley and Naomi, how do you do this? And you make the case in the book, belatedly, Nancy Pelosi, who leaves and is lauded, says, essentially, if he had left if he had said in 2022, he would be lionized, and he forewent that chance. And part of me thought, A, how could you not do it? But did they just know that there's no way he wouldn't be embarrassed to leave? That there's no way that they could make the case to him, you'd be the hero?
I don't think that they thought that way. I just think that's just like, this is the family patriarch in, I mean, imagine if Joseph Kennedy, the father of John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and whatever, imagine if he was like the Joseph Kennedy. He was the one that founded the dynasty. There just wasn't anybody there who kind of had the standing to do it. People say, why didn't Jill do it? She loves him so much. Why didn't Hunter do it? I just don't think that they saw him the way that the rest of us saw him. And I mean, you have more insight into the family than I do. What do you think?
Well, I've seen this with members of my own family. I think when somebody is aging, I've seen it on both sides, where some people intervene early in order to protect the person. But I think also and I think this is what happened here, they were in denial about the severity of his decline. And I mean, it was a denial of convenience too. I think they were willing themselves to, but I think they just refused to acknowledge, like, again, I've seen this in my family, where it's like, I had a family member and I was like, this person should not be on the road. I would not be comfortable driving on the roads with this person in the family. And their son was like, no, like he's fine. He's like, and it was sort of, they were willing, like by sheer will, they could stop the aging. And in some ways, I think there was some similarities here.
But I also think that there's stuff wrapped up in Jill liking being First Lady, and Hunter worried what happens if his dad's not the president and not able to protect him. I think that there's some of that as well. It's, we contain multitudes. It's a complicated situation, and I think there was just a lot of everything.
You all have also looked at the media ecosphere and what people should have done. And Jake, I want to ask you about a choice that you made in talking about the book. A lot's been made of the call you made to Lara Trump to apologize for a back and forth on the show. Donald Trump had made fun somewhat of Biden and his stutter. You were asking her about that, and she says, no, I think it's cognitive decline. And you essentially say, how would you be able to determine that? And
this is October 2020, yeah.
And you go back and you say, I should have handled that differently. That hit me kind of funny, and I want to tell you why. This is the same lady who claimed that the Democrats were going to rig the 2020 election, even though the Trump appointees in place said that it was free and fair. She claimed that the Dominion voting system may have doctored the election result, pushed hydrochloroquine as a COVID cure, claimed Democrats were allowing undocumented people in to boost their votes, and had very nasty things to say about trans people, attacked George Soros. The list goes on. And I wondered why you felt she deserved an apology, because as I looked at that, I thought, a broken clock is right twice a day. But I do want to finish this. Is she not part with that of an ecosphere? It's on the left too, but particularly on the right. You don't know the terrain that you're on. Is somebody in good faith making an argument? Or are they lifting something up from Breitbart, Bannon, Gateway Pundit? This is just the nasty stuff we're going to throw out there. And she was active in that. Were you not right to be skeptical of her? Did she deserve your apology?
Well, I'm not saying that I would vote for her. And I'm not testifying as to the quality or lack thereof of her character. Our reporting suggested that some of the cognitive issues started as far back as 2015. Mm-hmm. Her report suggested that some of his cognitive issues started as far back as 2017. And when when we were done reporting the book and we had reached our conclusions, it became clear that her skepticism was warranted, and my pushback was, in my view, overly aggressive. The fact that there are people on the right or the left who are bad faith actors does not make the moments where, whether it's a broken clock or not, they are correct and I am incorrect, any less correct. And I do not think saying, you were right and I was wrong, and I wish I'd handled that differently, and I told her I would say so publicly when the book tour started. And I don't think that how she's handled it, other things she said, how she's handled any number of issues, changes anything about that. And I have the confidence in my character enough to know that my acknowledging when I'm wrong is actually a source of strength, because there's nobody who is infallible. I mean, I get that it has, my comment to her has been used by the right in a bad faith way, and that's not a surprise. But that doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, I look at that interview and I think I wish I'd handled it differently, and I look at our reporting and I think, well, her skepticism about Biden's cognition was accurate, and mine wasn't, whether she got it from Breitbart or not. And look, all I can do is try to be as accurate and fair and thorough as I can be, and admit when I fall short of that. And I know of the examples being set by all the players in this drama, I feel fine about the example I'm setting for my kids.
Good answer.
A smattering of applause. Okay.
In the last part of the book, you talk about what happens when he drops out and Kamala Harris picks up the mantle. And they lay out that Biden really liked Gretchen Whitmer. That was the other person that he really thought about, but for various reasons they go with Kamala Harris. My feelings watching what they did to Kamala, she had her failings, but they actively, in my opinion, did everything they could to cut her knees out from under her, to tell everybody she can't do it. He's got to run because she can't do it. Would he have done the same thing to Gretchen Whitmer? Like anybody else in that role, he would have, it wouldn't have mattered. He would have said, this person can't do it.
I think, I mean, it's unknowable, but I do think there was, the way we write it is that his heart was with Gretchen Whitmer, and but on paper his mind was with Kamala Harris. And part of the reason for that is because Gretchen Whitmer, in his mind, was the next generation of Biden Democrat. Sort of center-left, like lots of like homespun wisdom with like phrases from your dad, focus on fixing the roads, not sort of an overly progressive ideological figure. In some way, I mean, you could sort of say it's like she was like a J.D. Vance-esque figure, but for like Biden Democrats. And, he was pushed by his advisors that they needed to, unite the party because there was still these fresh memories of Hillary and Bernie dividing the party. And in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, some of the advisors said that they needed to unite the party, and that black woman had been the most loyal base of the Democratic Party. And
she'd been vetted on a national stage
yes.
because of her presidential race.
And so, despite his misgivings, and despite the family's misgivings, they picked her. Now, I think to your point, cutting her off the knees, because of how contentious the primary had been between the two of them, there was this culture, and especially emanating from the First Lady's office, that there was this feeling among many Biden aides that help the vice president, but don't overdo it. If you go out of your way to aid her, it was sort of seen as potentially disloyal. That was sort of the feeling among it, and so yeah, I think her vice presidency, while she had many flaws and did not help herself, I also think it's completely fair that not necessarily Biden himself, but the team around him did not set her up for success.
You opened the book with Joe Biden getting up the day after the election and thinking he could have won, even after everything he's been told.
That he would have won.
That he would have won.
He still thinks that.
Which boggles the mind. And it made me wonder, is there anything, as he's watched the last 4 months, and at the end of the book, you say his choice to give pardons to his family, somebody thinks opens the door for some of the pardons we're seeing now.
A Trump advisor tells that to a CNN reporter. Yeah.
My prediction is in the next matter of months, we'll see Derek Chauvin pardoned, which would be a seismic event.
Yeah, but aren't those state charges too? There's federal charges and state charges. Like he'll still be in prison because there were state charges.
I figured that there would be something of, is there anything that would get to a level that Joe Biden would say the cost was too high?
We shouldn't. So a Trump advisor said to our CNN legal reporter, Paula Reed, who's awesome, that Joe Biden pardoning Hunter and also railing against the Justice Department as he did it, made the Trump team feel like they could go farther with their pardons than they would have. But at this point, I really don't think the pardons that Donald Trump is handing out has anything to do with Hunter Biden or any member of the Biden family that he pardoned on his way out the door. I think at this point, he's, whatever the opposite of the weaponization of the Justice Department, I mean, like, turning it into like a favorization, or I mean, there needs, somebody is a librarian here can help me with that word, but I mean, he's obviously just like giving pardons to people who are MAGA supporters, and it has nothing to do with Hunter Biden. Yeah.
I would just add to that, you know, I think Biden, his family, and his closest advisors will go to the end of their days, whenever that happens to be, and hope it's a long time from now, believing he would have won and could have won, and blaming the elite members of the Democratic Party for kicking him off the ballot. And I think, and part of that is because they really believe it, but also I think part of that is because it's too big of a thing to admit.
That you got it wrong.
But you got it wrong, and that you basically, your misjudgments paved the way for the return of Donald Trump, and you know, getting rid of him was the definition of your presidency, to save the soul of the nation, to end Trump, to end Trumpism, and like ultimately, top Democrats we talked to, you know, many of them on the record said he paved the way for the return of Donald Trump. And one of the other things that was so interesting researching this book is that it became clear that his advisors were not only hiding Joe Biden from the world, they were hiding the world from Joe Biden. And his pollsters, Pollack and Guerin and Murphy, they're all in the book, they never got to meet with Joe Biden. They never got to meet with President Biden. And they would submit their data that showed how in trouble he was before the debate. Before the debate, he was in massive trouble. And Mike Donnellan and Steve Ricchetti would, take that data and put it through the, magical mystery tour and like give it to him, and it was like, oh, you got this, you can do this. You're only a couple points behind. You're fine. And meanwhile, Whitmer and Shapiro and the other governors are like, what numbers is he looking at? Like, what polling is he looking at? Because he's losing in Pennsylvania. He's losing in Wisconsin and Michigan. Like, he's not going to win. And when the pollsters are supposed to have this meeting with President Biden between the debate and when Biden drops out, and it gets canceled. So finally they get a meeting just with the top advisors, and they're like, here's our presentation. And it's basically, you can't win. Just numbers are not there because the debate reinforced the very reason why you were already losing. And it takes Chuck Schumer, when Schumer goes to Rehoboth, a week before Biden drops out, Chuck Schumer says, you haven't talked to your pollsters, I have. They give you a 5% chance of winning. And when we were reporting the story, I talked to one of the pollsters, and he said, more like 1%. So again, like, the truth was being kept from him, and it's probably easier to live in a world where he got done wrong than in the world where like, oh my God, you know, like they're banning foreign students from coming to the United States because of this decision you made.
Which leads us to a great place to end, which is at the end of the book. If nothing else, you raise the idea, should we have some sort of codified cognitive exam? And it raises the question of consequences. And I wrote out a little list, you know, what happens to the Donnellans and Richettis and Dunns? My guess is no consequences. And you could argue that it's why we're here. There were no consequences for the brain trust around Reagan in the second term. And there have been a lot of arguments about how much he knew and was in control. No consequences for those around George W. and the decisions which turned out to be based on faulty evidence to go into Iraq and Afghanistan. No consequences for those around Trump 1. Like as they left, everybody said, these guys will never get a job, it'll never work out. They are minting money right now. Is there a price to pay, and what would it be so we don't end up back here?
Well, I mean, DC is a truly amazing city where you can just continue to fail up decade over decades. So I don't have anything really that hopeful on that score. But, you know, to your point, you know, maybe there aren't consequences for those people, but the reason why we make the argument at the end of the book is maybe that this experience could still be a catalyst to prevent something like this from happening again. Because, you know, we go through in the book that covering up a president's health is as old as America. George Washington covered up his health. Woodrow Wilson, his wife, covered up the consequences from him having a stroke in 1919. FDR had no business running for a fourth term and then swapped out, you know, his vice president and then didn't even tell Harry Truman about the Manhattan Project. Then JFK was taking a medicine cabinet full of pills and lied to the American people about having Addison's. You mentioned Reagan. The thing is, like, the system is built that this will happen again. Joe Biden is not unique. And so we felt that having some sort of forced health disclosure in which, you know, the White House physician under penalty of perjury would have to submit to Congress, you know, what is going on with the president's health would be perhaps not consequence, but, you know, a way of perhaps preventing it from happening in the future.
Last word, Jake?
So, yeah, I mean, I just think that, you know, somebody said something like, well, you know, you have to be 35 to run and we should have a cutoff. And I just don't know that, first of all, you know, everybody's going to be living to be like 130 like in the next 50 years. So I don't even know where you do that cutoff. It's also not fair. People age at different rates. I'm sure that there are people who are 80 years old who could be a great president, and it's not about the age, although, you know, we all do slow down a little bit. It's about just the acuity that sometimes comes hand in hand with that. You know, that part I reject. It's interesting because so President Trump has been really opaque about his health records. In April, he gave a more robust health assessment than he had. It's a summary, as these things are, but it looked much more disclosing than previous ones. But I showed it to a doctor, and he said, "Well, here's all the things that he's not telling you." Like, and basically, and I think we should add this when we do the paperback. It should be like every drug you're taking needs to be listed. Now, don't just give us the ones that like nobody cares about. Like, tell us every drug you're taking and the results of every test. And there should be a list of tests that they're all required to take. But they don't do that because, as we have learned in the last decade, so much of this country is built upon the honor system, which only works if you have honor. Obviously you couldn't pass something, you can't pass any legislation that affects a current president because it will just never pass. But it should be law because we have a right to know. The American people had a right to know that Joe Biden was in the condition he was in. And even if they weren't giving him cognitive exams, probably because they didn't want to know what the results were, we had a right to know it, and the Democratic Party had a right to, the leaders of the Democratic Party had a right to know. So somebody could have said, you know, like, I realize, like, I only see you at the White House Christmas party, but, like, I don't know that you can do this. And, like, I looked at your last health exam and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But we write this book because, and honestly, like, it's a difficult topic. It's not fun covering people's deterioration. It's not fun, like, talking about a guy who's experienced so much tragedy in a way that is not particularly always sympathetic. But, you know, this can't happen again. It just can't, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican or whatever. One of the things that's been great about the response to this book is that, generally speaking, the reviews have been really nice, certainly nicer than the other reviews I've gotten for previous books. And people have been buying it. And because I think at the end of the day, whatever criticism's coming from the right or the left, like most normal people, the community of normies that embody the United States for the most part, want to know what happened. Because they have a right to know. We have a right to know.
So we'll leave it with a little bit of a cliffhanger. Will Jake be right? This can't happen again. No, Alex, this is gonna happen.
Oh, it will happen again. Don't misunderstand me. It will definitely happen again.
I want to thank both of you for coming and being so generous with your time and for putting in the work to write the book. It's been a delight to talk to you. Thank you to everybody who came out tonight and stayed a little later. Thank you for coming.